To order here at looks like 7:02 p.m. So good evening. I'm Andy Stack, Chair of the CA Board of Directors. Please remember that this meeting is being live streamed. The agenda and the background information is available on the CA Board webpage, and I would encourage people to follow along using these documents. For the meeting, please remember to mute your mic unless you're actually speaking. Please be courteous to each other. Speak clearly and slowly so that everyone can hear you. When you do speak, please state your first name so everyone knows who's speaking. And for the board in particular, if you could use the chat feature, because I can't always see everybody on my screen right at the moment. I will introduce each item on the agenda. And voting is roll call except in special circumstances when they're all unanimous. I will try to remember to restate the motion before the vote is taken. What I'd like to do now is call the roll of board members. Milton?
Here.
Nancy?
Here.
Janet?
Here.
Renee?
Present.
Shari?
Present.
Alan?
I'm here.
Dick?
I'm here.
Ginny?
Present.
Lynn?
Here.
Andy? He's here. All right, thank you very much. So first item here is I have some closed meetings to announce. I have some forms here, so please bear with me. There was a closed meeting of the Architectural Resource Committee on Monday, March 8th. In attendance were Deb Bach, Ed Gordon, DeVore Wilkinson. The vote to close was 3-0-0. The meeting was closed under Section 4, consultation with staff, personnel, consultants, attorneys, or other persons in connection with pending or potential litigation. The meeting was closed at 1:03 p.m. and opened at 2:05 p.m. And the purpose was discussion of new and ongoing covenant cases. There was a closed meeting of the Board of Directors on March 12, 2021. Dick, Jess, Renee, Lynn, Janet, Alan, Nancy, Ginny, Shari, Andy were all in attendance. The vote to close was 10-0-0. It was closed under Section 1, discussion of matters pertaining to employees and personnel. Meeting was closed at 6:15 p.m. and opened at 8:04 p.m. The purpose of the meeting was the presidential search. There was a closed meeting of the Architectural Committee on March 23rd, 2021. In attendance were Jim, Dick, Renee, Janet, and Tim. The vote to close was 5-0-0. It was closed under Section 1 and Section 4. Section 1, discussion of matters pertaining to employees and personnel. In Section 4, consultation with staff, personnel, consultants, attorneys, board members, or other persons in connection with pending or potential litigation or other legal matters. Meeting was closed at 8:15 p.m. and opened at 9:52 p.m. And the purpose was to review audit reports and consultation with staff, personnel, and legal matters. And there was a closed meeting of the Board of Directors on March 24th, 2021. In attendance were Dick, Renee, Jess, Lynn, Janet, Alan, Nancy, Ginny, Shari, Andy. The vote that actually closed was 9-0-1. Renee was not present at the time we actually took the vote. The reason to close was 1, discussions of matters pertaining to employees and personnel. The meeting was closed at 7:03 p.m. and opened at 10 p.m. and the purpose was presidential search. That's what I have right now. I'd like to move to approval of the agenda. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
Ginny moved. Is there a second? Nancy? Nancy. All right. Is there any objection? Hearing none, the agenda is approved. Thank you. Okay, we'll move on to resident speak out. We had two people signed up. Is Kemi here? I don't have a last name. Kemi. Any? No. Perhaps he or she will come a little later. If not, we'll move on to Nina Basu. And Nina, thank you very much. Welcome.
Hello. Hi, Andy. Hi, board. I'm here on behalf of the Inner Arbor Trust today. Before you, you have for your approval a letter drafted by Milton Matthews regarding the trust's request to be included in the fiscal 22 Howard County budget. We would really appreciate CA's support for this request. I just wanted to take this opportunity to give you a really brief update on these two projects, and I think that these two projects will also save CA money in the long term, so we're hoping that you can support them. We're asking for funding for two projects. The first is for what we're referring to as park edging, which is conservation landscaping on the northern and eastern boundaries of Symphony Woods, where it's adjacent to Little Patuxent Parkway and the newly realigned Symphony Woods Road. As anyone who's been on the property knows, those are areas with slopes. We get a lot of runoff from the mall. The newly aligned Symphony Woods Road also produces a tremendous amount of runoff. We've had significantly more rain in the last few years than previously, and all of that pools within Symphony Woods itself, creating a lot of cost, especially with events. The proposal is to work with Howard County Eco Works, which is a 501c3 here in Howard County that is not only an environmental organization, but a green jobs and job training organization. So we will be working with them and providing job training and employment opportunities with this funding from Howard County, as well as the funding that we've requested from both private and public grant makers to match those Howard County funds. We will be able to, keep all this money locally. It'll be great for the land, but it'll also do a lot to reduce some of the costs of aeration and these other costs that are incurred by CA, and to a lesser extent the trust, consistently as we just deal with all the mud. The second project is a stream restoration project, and I've been very careful with how I describe this. When a lot of us think about stream restoration, we think about river reclamation, where we're cutting down a bunch of trees and trying to, move a lot of dirt. That is not this project. This is to manage the intermittent or ephemeral stream on the eastern side of Symphony Woods. One of the things that we have noticed in even the last year, there has been significant damage. We've got areas where we've got 4-foot cliff drop, these lovely old beech trees with all their roots exposed. Interestingly, between last spring and this spring, the erosion has gotten so bad that we actually unearthed the little spring house that was buried in the ground that we didn't know was there before, which we found earlier this week when we were on site with the team. This is a surgical small project. It is tied to the Bend in the Creek Playground, which is an environmental all abilities play space. The request to the county is for $600,000 for this first phase, which is primarily design, but also doing some stream bed raising so we can deal with some of the dangerous issues with these sheer drops, and starting with some riparian planting to help update that stream. As we go through the design process, we're going to decide whether the correct solution is to try to keep water flowing, or whether it is to essentially use a dry creek bed type of technology to make sure that water's not stagnant. We have a big mosquito problem in the area that we want to get rid of. Again, this is a piece of CA property, and all of this this work that hopefully will be funded in large part by the county deals with a lot of this runoff that's coming from other properties and coming from Symphony Woods Road, but hopefully will save not only the trust money, but CA money, and will also be a great educational opportunity for people to really enjoy some of these plantings. So if anyone has any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Yep, thanks, Nina. We have some questions here. Ginny, then Dick. Ginny?
Nina, please extend my compliments to you, the Inner Arbor Board, the CA board members that serve on the Inner Arbor Board, and others that from the outside that have been very involved in this whole concept plan, et cetera. I just admire the stewardship that you all are showing for the land, the caring, and you are also, what I like is proactive. Because I and other colleagues on the board, I'm sure, are dealing with a lot of erosion problems, very serious erosion problems. It's getting a lot worse. It's one of, as far I feel, one of the biggest problems facing CA now and in the future, both from an environmental point of view and an economic point of view. So I just want to compliment what you're doing here. I certainly hope the county will help. And also the last thing is the initiative that you're showing in terms of partnering with other groups, which you know, and as a pet peeve for me, that we need to do more and more of that to bring the money in. Show me the money and bring it in so that CA lien payers don't have to pay all the time. So thank you.
We're trying to bring in as much money as possible. That was the directive from the board, from the trust board.
Dick?
Yeah, this urban archaeology sounds really interesting. Where is this spring house? Is it on the southern border or the eastern border? And just what form is it? What do we have there?
It's towards the eastern border. It's probably 200-300 feet from the chrysalis, actually, from the closest edge to the chrysalis. If you kind of go up the stream through that grove of beech trees, as if you're going to sort of the towards the meadow, towards the new path, you'll see that there's a huge kind of, just it looks like something cut through and just got rid of all of the dirt by that grove of beech trees. And what we think but don't know, because we just don't have any images from that, is that at least part of that spring house was probably visible, but just kind of hard to see. It's clear that over the last few months, a lot of this dirt around the spring house has gone. It's pretty beat up. It's probably 4 feet by 6 feet. It's got a little metal door. We're trying to do a little historical understanding of what it is. We went into it, and there's like a random standpipe in it. There's actually, I mean, it sounds ridiculous. There is a small tree growing on top of it.
Well, I guess if we want to see it, we better get in there before the leaves
before the leaves
grow.
come in, or before we get rid of it.
Yeah, is it stone or brick or what?
So it's interesting. So when the design team was on site earlier this week, they don't think it's ancient because it looks like it looks more like some sort of concrete-esque substance. So their guess is that sometime between 1930s to 1940s, maybe.
Okay, well, thank you.
Any other questions for Nina? All right, thank you, Nina. Appreciate your coming out for us to speak out. Is Kemi here? KMI? No, not yet. Okay, that is all I had for signed up for resident speak out. Move on. Consent agenda. By consent, we have approved the minutes for February 25th, 2021. Now move on to board votes. And the first item up is letter of support for Senate Bill 144, House Bill 110. Milton, is there anything you'd like to say? Or
Now, this letter was drafted in response to the direction from the board, if I recall correctly, from the work session.
Yes.
And after the board discussed, and what is important also is all the backup material that came with it.
Okay, board members, is there a motion to approve sending that letter and then we can discuss it? Shari moved and Ginny, I think, seconded. Give me a minute here.
Yes.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? I think
Yeah.
Shari was there. Oh, Shari first and then Ginny. Sorry.
I would just like to thank you, Milton, and the staff for moving quickly on this. And so I was doing a little background on this. Of course, we know that the crossover date was this week, but we know that this is an important time for CA to be on the record as far as supporting these types of bills that will help to lower the carbon footprint, not only here, but throughout the state. And since CA has a really good track record as far as being ahead on these matters, I think it's really good for us to continue to support these. And I thank you very much for doing that.
Okay, thanks, Shari. Ginny?
Yeah, is there any chance that CA, since we are an HOA, can apply for any of these grants? I know we've been installing these things, but can we apply for grants now? Or have we been applying for grants? To fund?
I'm not aware of us applying for grants, and we would just have to follow up and see whether it will be applicable to Columbia Association.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it says HOA, and we are an HOA, so thank you very much.
Any other questions, any other discussion on the proposal, the letter of support? If not, I'll take a vote. So let me ask first, is there anyone opposed or wanting to abstain on the bill? All right, hearing none, then it basically is approved 9-0. Okay, the next item is a letter of support to the county regarding Inner Arbor Trust's request. Milton, anything you want to?
Now, once again, it came out of a discussion, a previous discussion. We got information from Nina, and this is the draft letter that we put out there. The reason why I didn't, well, just like any of them, I didn't sign them because I wanted to make sure if there was any changes, the board could make those, suggest or incorporate those changes, and then we'll move on it.
Move for approval?
Okay, Jenny moved. Is there a second? Nancy seconded. Just a second, please. Okay, any discussion?
Lynn had her hand up. I don't know whether you were voting or not. I mean, approval or what?
Lynn, do you have anything to say?
No, I was just volunteering to second, so I'll third it.
Okay, Alan has a question. Alan?
Yeah, if I guess it's the question for Milton. If there should be any change in the trust status, if it should go out of business, if it should decide to revert its easements back to CA, whatever, would this affect would the ability for this, should these grants or whatever these are called come through, would that impact the ability to use those funds for the purposes intended?
Well, number one, my response, and then I know Sherry's out there, I would say if we are fortunate enough to get the dollars, and whether it's the one from Howard County or the state, number one, CA will work with the trust. And using in response to your scenario, if the trust is not there, it's still CA's land, and we will move forward, in my opinion, in implementing and fulfilling the requirements of the grant.
So we'd still be eligible to do that, even though Inner Arbor Corporation was the recipient of the grants?
Well, Alan, that's very technical because one of the things about it, with the way the Ann Arbor Trust is set up and the way the easement agreement is set up, there will have to be a successor organization. And I want to believe that that successor organization would continue the responsibilities, or at least the ones that we would have to.
I see Sherry has.
I'm
made
here.
herself known.
I'm here.
Did you have an opinion on this?
Well, presumably for the period of time that's in question here, regardless of what happens down the road, the trust would continue to exist. So I don't think it would be an issue. But even if that were not the case, as Milton said, there has to be a successor organization to the trust. And so not only the obligations, but the benefits would flow to the successor organization to the trust. So I believe that, yes, the money would still be spent for the purpose for which it was intended.
Okay, thank you.
Any other questions? Any other discussion? If not, I guess we're ready to vote. So let me ask, is there anyone who is opposed or would want a voice vote on this? All right, so hearing no objection, the letter is approved. The letter regarding the IAT grant is approved 900. Thank you. Okay, next item up, we're on the board discussion, and it's a reserve fund policy and program. Milton, I'm going to just ask if you have anything you want to.
Well, I hope that all the board members had an opportunity to read the document, and we will walk you through it. And but Susan and Len, they put a lot of time in this, and so I will turn to them.
Thanks, Milton. Susan, Lynn?
Yeah, so good evening, everybody. I'm gonna, you have in the packet a memo, a cover memo that explains our approach and the thought process, and then also a draft policy. But I did do some slides to sort of fill in a little bit more. So let me share some of this. Okay, so what we thought we would do would be to give you some background on how the nonprofit sector has approached reserves in the past and how that's evolved over the past 15 or so years, and then just to try to connect those concepts to our organization, and then explain how staff came up with the draft that we presented. So reserves, there's some key things about them. They're generally expected to be perpetual and dynamic, not static, so that they wouldn't stay the same forever. They would move with the organization's needs and with what is happening in the environment and the broader economy. Generally, organizations often will use them as internal financing. We're not really presenting that option, but that is common. And there's an intersection with investment policy that was approved by the board some time ago. And in general, often board investment expertise might be weak, but there's still a lot of pressure on the organization and the governance for sound management and strong governance. So,
could you define internal financing for me, please?
So lots of organizations, the models that I saw in the research that we did and the people that I talked to, it's like an internal line of credit in a way, that you would set a reserve target, and it could be used for an organization that might not have access to a commercial line or chose to use it for in lieu of debt financing or something, but that's how. So you would save up money basically, and then use it for routine matters that just like you would in external financing.
Okay, so let me just make sure I'm understanding. Several of us, or at least I know I did, I'll just speak for myself, have pressed you pretty hard around using the reserve, like, we'll just use the example, funding the Haven, opening more pools. That sounds like that fits under there. Am I correct in that, or are you reading it as something different?
That would be true if it didn't create a loss, again, it's the same, we're already starting on the same line of instruction, I guess, that as long as it didn't create a bottom line loss to the organization, certainly you could do that.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. This is an array of reasons that organizations would need reserves. I'm not saying these are all the reasons why CA would, but these are many reasons why. And what has, there's just so much external disruption that puts stress on an organization now. And so it's often for these types of reasons that organizations have reserves. And again, this is nonprofit sector research. And so just some examples of where you're seeing it. These were nonprofit headlines.
Could you go back to that previous slide? I hadn't finished reading it.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, so.
No.
Nancy, you had a question.
Who did?
Nancy?
Oh, okay.
You stated that the reserve is okay to use as long as it doesn't create a loss in the bottom line.
Right.
So if we were to use it on the pools, for example, because opening more pools apparently creates a loss,
Right.
does that mean that this reserve fund would not be applicable here?
Correct.
Well then, okay, this is tough to understand. What will the reserve fund actually fund? Because as you know, virtually everything is running at a loss.
Well, it would fund things where it would fund capital projects, like if there was an extreme a capital impact that we needed to address. It would be something that would be where we didn't have a choice, where something was going to create a loss, and we needed the cash, like an uninsured event that is like where we didn't have adequate insurance company coverage for a D&O matter, for example, exceeded our coverage, or employment practices. So for those kinds of things, that where you just have no choice in the matter as far as whether there's a loss incurred or not.
Okay, so to follow on, I just want to ask, opening pools, as you know, we all know, is critically important to our community. And I get the sense that this reserve fund won't help in that area at all.
It depends on how many. It depends on what the rest of the situation is like. Is the organization going to run in a loss? Is it going to put us into a loss situation for a year to open additional pools? You know, I just really the reason that we are able to get the financing that we were able to get was that CA didn't run in a loss. That there are. There's such scrutiny on our bottom line from our lenders that it would not be prudent. We're not through this pandemic still, and so if that is something that is a catastrophic matter or such a disruption that you know. I don't know how else to explain it. I think this is what we're saying is to set aside some cash, and it's not even a lot, for these really catastrophic things, like what happened in the spring with a pandemic and a recession.
Susan, can I, I want to follow up on this. From your list, it looks like we could spend it on a capital project because that would not affect the bottom line. I mean, our assets would remain the same. And it also seems that we would be able to use this for a temporary gap so that we could cover a cash flow problem, but by the end of the year, we would cover for it. Is that an accurate situation? Because it seems to me, anytime you dip into this, we're gonna have a loss in assets unless we can apply it to a capital expenditure.
So this is how in general organizations use reserves. This is not what is as proposed in what I have. So this is general, like that's, what other organizations, especially those who don't have access to commercial financing, what they would use their reserves for. So maybe we could move forward and sort of get through this
Okay. Yeah, I'm just trying to find out what kind of things we can spend it on.
Right, that's in the policy that was drafted and sent out on Monday and posted.
Okay.
Let's try to let Susan finish her briefing, and then we have Ginny, Milton, and Renee.
Yeah, but can I just say one thing before? We don't even have a reserve yet. So you can't spend what you don't have. So let's learn what this is about, and then we can figure out after we have some money how to spend the money.
Okay, let's let Susan finish, and then I've got Ginny and Milton.
So I won't take a long time on this. Some of this is in the memo that just describes where there was an actual organized formal effort to develop some nonprofit best practice around reserves. And that was 2008. It was this group entity with some really strong leadership in nonprofits to develop some expertise and some understanding. They wrote, it's called NORI is the acronym for short, and it's in the, I noted in the memo and the website for you to, if you like. They wrote a white paper that's really helpful. They developed a policy toolkit. At the end of the day, they said there's no right answer, but 3 months of operating expenses was a good baseline. Now that was 2008, so that was right before the Great Recession. Okay, so again, that's just reiterating the same thing. So this is a part of the work, their work with a white paper, and I referred to that in the memo, and you can see the whole thing in the website link that I provided. So the context now is using the phrase sustainability in terms of, and that's what we talked about for CA, making sure that it's sustained as an organization, not just environmental sustainability, but it's the ability to be able to continue to carry out activities that will achieve the mission and making sure that we have the capacity for relevance in the future. So it's hitting that sweet spot between current operations and the long-term health of the organization. So you can move forward about 10 years ago, the next iteration of reserve planning for nonprofits is focused around risk management, enterprise risk management. And it just was, a move away from, 3 months of expenses sounds right, and trying to do a real risk-based, data-driven analysis of what the issues are, what the strategies are, and what our risk profile and risk tolerance is, and coming up with a reserve strategy and policy based on risk tolerance. So, since the Great Recession, a lot of organizations were able to rebuild their reserves. What CA did instead was get out of all of its old debt just in time for this pandemic. So there are some great tools available now. As far as you saw, I used the matrix that we found in the memo and did a little survey of the key staff members. And so I'm getting some background noise. Sorry about that. That person's vacuuming here. So we dug into this, did a lot of research for nonprofits, and we took a hard look at, okay, what are our risks for really significant disruptive events, and what would be their, and I applied this tool, and let me show it to you. So it's really teeny, I know, but it's in the memo. And what we identified were, yes, we should have some cash on hand for operations. 60 days is not very much. That's 2 months, but that's the minimum. Annual charge revenue, that declining property values would be a significant risk to this organization. And we determined that the impact of that, so what the maximum potential was, we thought $5 million, which would be over a 10% decrease. We think that that's 75% likely, and we would have like maybe the 50% of that would be likely to occur in 1 year. So the impact is so we have a maximum potential exposure. If the whole thing fell apart, what would be the worst case scenario? And that's the maximum problem. Impact is how much of this would really hit the organization at any one time, and then what's the likelihood that it would occur? What's the probability? And then we spread that out over time horizon. Line of credit. So the line of credit is a 3-year line. The non-renewal of that would be a significant risk to the organization. We think that that's not that likely, but we thought it needed to be documented that we addressed it. And then uninsured legal expenses. So we have robust coverage for certain matters, but the nature of of risk management in the current environment, and not CA, but our sort of national environment, is with jury awards and damages. They're extreme. And so what we did here was we looked at the key coverages, like high risk coverages, like employment practices, like directors and officers, the cyber coverage, and the flood coverage, because we had experience with that, with Fairway Hills, and came up with a maximum exposure based on our current insurance coverage that's benchmarked against others, and said, if 90% of that, I think that what that means is those dollar amounts are reasonable. So 90% of that could occur, but it's only 10% likely. And then we spread it out over a time horizon that we thought would potentially be achievable for CA. So, and then for the line of credit, obviously that risk doesn't happen until 2024. So that's the perspective on trying to take a data and risk evaluation approach to developing this. And then I just explained where that came from. So the reserve policy, I got some really great samples from our accounting firm, actually, from other clients, and it should have these handful of items, and we made sure to address that in the policy, the draft that we provided. And so I think what I'd like to do, is go to that policy. And so we see we have the matrix, we have the assumptions explaining those, and then we benchmarked it. We said, okay, so the older model was 25% of cash expenses, right, or three months. So what would that be? I showed 25%, just based on the FY22 budget, is almost $12.6 million. That's an awful lot of cash to set aside over any short-term period for CA to accomplish. Compared it to the village community associations, because they currently keep 20% of uncommitted cash, which is a different number. I use just total cash, and just showed where they are. And again, this is average. I know each one is different, but just to give a sense of what we were looking at. And these are the actual numbers for FY19, FY20. That's our third quarter estimate for 21. And the budget, we don't have the budget yet for the villages. They're still working on it. And again, this is on your backup. So we recommend starting with an initial reserve amount of $5 million. That covers the first, the minimum target on the risk matrix. We recommend, you were going to do this anyway, to look at a draft policy, so we provided that. And then just hitting the highlights that it should be reviewed annually, the model and the amount, and as the budget is developed. Take a look at the amount of the reserves. There should be a detailed review and analysis every 3 years, and that the use would be on a case-by-case basis, and it would be other tools or other mitigation strategies such as reducing expenses, et cetera, and using the commercial line would be first before using those cash reserves. So that's, and then those are our recommendations. And then you have in your packet, again, the policy. So I'll stop there. I've talked a lot. And,
Okay, thanks, Susan.
You're welcome.
Let's see, we have Ginny and then Milton.
Okay. Susan, two quick questions. One is, it sounds like in terms of CA anyway, and I've had experience with this with other organizations, but in terms of CA, it sounds like we're looking more at the reserve fund for capital, like bridges being blown out on our golf courses because of environmental conditions, as opposed to operating budget. Is that correct?
No, not necessarily, because if we have an uninsured legal expense, that would not be
Legal. Right, legal, but I mean, day-to-day staffing and other things.
Yeah, the thought is that this is a big step for CA to create a cash reserve, and it should be treated with that,
Right. So
level.
we wouldn't use it for something like that, is what I'm saying. We would use it more for more of a
For
capital.
extraordinary, right.
Extraordinary, yeah.
I think the language here is
Right.
unforeseen, immediate, and otherwise unsurmountable, like where we would just not have any other option. Basically.
Right, Doug. Okay, the second question is, we were all along talking about $2 million in a reserve fund. You are now recommending $5 million for the FY22 or 23 budget?
So I would recommending, so it doesn't have to be budgeted, because it's moving cash from one, a general account to a reserve account on the balance sheet. But I would recommend that by the end of 22, April 30, 2022, that there be $5 million in that reserve based on the exposure.
Okay, what I'm trying to connect the dots to, the board by an 8-2 vote passed that if there's any excess money, looks like it's starting to come in either from the current budget and from the current budget and from the new budget that'll start May 1st, 2021, the FY22 budget, that will go towards opening the pool. Some of that may be a little bit of capital, but very little, but opening the remaining pools. Now, what's the connection to if you want to hold back $5 million?
So the pool's expense will be in FY22, and that will reduce the bottom line in FY22. So the assessment of the ability to have the resources to open pools will happen after May 1. And so this just is putting aside cash on the balance sheet that is already there at this point to create a cash reserve that would be used under for these specific circumstances.
Okay,
I'm sorry. A quick question on that. So, if there's surplus cash in FY21, you're saying that that would go into the rainy day fund and not be used for opening the pools? Opening
It's not,
some pools.
so we'll open the pools if it looks like the FY22 revenue will be greater than we thought or budgeted for. So these are two separate items. And I see, Renee, maybe you could help me explain that. I see you nodding.
Well, let me make sure I understand before Renee does. I hate being repetitive here, but what I'm asking is, if there's a surplus in FY21, because pool opening is you've got to almost make a decision in June. So if we're only going to look at a budget in May and June for FY22, we may be reaching a point where it would be too late to open pools, or you're only going to open them maybe for August. So if you're going to have a surplus in FY21, why can't you use some of that money, in addition to what you just said, to at least look at opening some of the outdoor pools? I'm missing the point. What are you going to do with that? Does that go into the rainy day fund or not?
It's not a rainy day fund again.
Well,
It's not, yeah.
it's a reserve fund. Sorry about that.
So one thing that everybody needs to understand is that our year end is April 30th.
Right,
And we cannot spend money before April 30th for something that's going to happen next year, okay, on May 31st. And so any profit we have this year, I don't know that we're going to have a profit. We're going to be pretty close to break even, has to be spent now on things now versus things in the future. So we have to, I know it's difficult because our year end is in a crazy place, but, and I agree with you, Jenny, you know I want the pools open more than anyone, but this isn't how we're going to get them open. I mean, we're going to, if we want to open the pools, we have to cut something else in that budget. That's what we have to do. And there's no appetite for that. So this is a separate discussion.
We need to take a 5-minute break. We're having some technical problems. So if everybody can just hold on for 5 minutes.
Okay.
And we'll get the technical problems straightened out. we can continue here. Thank you, Drew. Thank you, Sam. So hopefully everyone is ready and back, because I can't always see everybody on the screen. I just want to remind everyone that this is the first discussion on the reserve fund. We also have it set for discussion on the April work session meeting and further discussion and perhaps a vote on the April meeting. So there'll be two more opportunities after this, just so you know that. All right. Milton, you're next.
Now, I will be very quick. I wanted to respond more to where Ginny was heading. I would ask the board think when it comes to the cash reserve fund on emergencies, unplanned, unforeseen. It's not a fund where you can tap if you want to do something. Our income to supplement our income. If our income is for any particular fiscal year does not cover our expenses, or our expenses are greater than any fiscal year, we should not be tapping the reserve fund to supplement that shortage. The reserve fund is for emergencies, unplanned, unforeseen circumstances that would jeopardize the operation or the continuation of the Columbia Association.
Excuse me, Milton, I just got to respond to Milton. That isn't what I was saying. I understand a reserve fund. I've worked with reserve funds. That is not what I was asking at all in terms of my questions regarding FY21 and FY22 budget. Okay, thank you.
All right. Renee, you're actually next, and then Alan and Dick.
So if we had, let me just say this, if we had a profit this year, or we had more income than expenses, and you wanted to open the pools and you knew it back in January, as a board, you could have instructed senior staff to empty the pools, hire subcontractors, empty the pools, get them filled, and have the work done by April 30th to book those expenses in this fiscal year. That would have cut down on some of the expenses after April 30th. But you can't move expenses back and forth any other way. There's not much. You can't pay a lifeguard today for work to be done in August, and that's part of the problem.
Okay, Alan, and then Dick.
Well, that leads me to, welcome to your least favorite accounting dummy. But, and again, help me if, I don't know if this is a question for you, Renee, or for Susan, or both of you. If I have a $1,000 budget and I only spend $900 of it in a year, the $100 that I didn't spend that I had in income doesn't go away. So I could choose, under the way I think of budgeting, or think of using money, to say, oh, look, I've got an extra $100. I will pay lifeguards next year using this $100. If I can't pay the lifeguards next year with $100, where in the heck does this $100 go?
So the $100 is on our balance sheet. And Alan, there's part of this conversation that I am willing to have with you offline that I'm not willing to have in public about why this is so important.
Okay, then I need to ask somebody else who's willing to have it in public, because I'm really trying to understand this system, but it just to say that this goes along with, I think, at least in my mind, Susan, with your comment earlier, this doesn't have to be budgeted.
So it's the difference between cash and accrual accounting. You, as an individual, we do our accounting on a cash basis. So if we receive the cash in a year, it's income for that year, and we can spend it that year. Our expenses are on that basis, based on the cash. But for a CA and most organizations, it's there's this accrual basis of accounting. You incur the expense in the period in which, or you record the expense in the period in which you incur it. So if I have cash left over this year, but next year I have to pay lifeguards or anybody, the expense has to be recorded next year. The cash helps me pay pay the person or the vendor, but it doesn't help me with when the expense is recorded.
Okay,
And,
well,
and
okay.
the difference between the two types of accounting, and we're not allowed to use the cash basis like individuals
I
are.
get that, but that's an accounting thing, but I'm just talking real life here.
Right.
So I'm CA, and I budgeted and brought in $1,000. I budgeted for it, and for whatever reason, I only spent 900. Now, next year I do the same thing. I budget for $1,000, but I realize, oh, I've got $1,100 of expenses. I get that it might be weird on the books, but in real life, I've got this $100 sitting there that I brought in as income. I didn't burn it. I didn't eat it. Why can't I spend that $100 the next year to pay that extra expense that I had? I'm really trying to understand this. I mean, and not just why it feels weird from an accounting point of view.
Yeah, it's not that it feels weird. It's the way, it's the right and wrong of it. It's what's required. So.
Well, then help me understand what happens to that $100.
It sits in the, it can be two things. It can sit in the bank account and be used for the next COVID shutdown, or it can be used to reduce the borrowing on the line of credit if we have to do that. So it's the cash gets used for those types of things, but it doesn't add income to the organization in the next year. The income is only recorded in the year it's received.
Okay, so where I'm hearing you.
Okay.
Where I'm getting a little still cross-eyed on this is we use the line of credit to pay operating expenses while we're waiting for assessment dollars to come in, if I'm understanding that correctly.
Right.
So that's, and if we could use the $100 to not borrow as much, then we could use that $100 to pay operating expenses. It's like, feels like a transitive property of accounting that's not making sense to me, or a lack of a transitive property. Like if A equals B and B equals C, shouldn't A equal C? And it sounds like it doesn't.
Alan, maybe perhaps the thing to do is we need to think about having, I'll say, a short, quick course on accrual accounting so we can answer those types of questions and explain the situation. How does that sound?
Well, I think that would be fine, and if we can do it in a time frame that will fit with this discussion and will answer the questions, I'm okay with that. So let me go on then. The money that's projected to go into this, we're talking about basically close to $4 million a year over 4 years to be put into this reserve fund to get up to 50, really 15 million, because you said the 12 million plus doesn't include the 3 million that we already have to have for the lender. And so if I'm understanding this correctly, we're talking close to 4 million a year over 4 years, in addition to doing what we need to do to dig out of what COVID has left us, and in addition to having to what we've been talking about for the last few years, which is having to really think about our aging infrastructure and how to best fund needed changes and repairs and upgrades, et cetera. So this just feels like I go back to what I've said before, and someone has said, I'm still trying to really wrap my mind around. I can see why a reserve fund, I think, is a good idea. This feels like the worst time to initiate a reserve fund. It's like we've been not doing it when we should have, when the sun was shining, and now that it's storming on us in various ways. Let's do the reserve fund. This just feels like the wrong time.
Dick, and then Shari. Dick?
Jess also has joined us, by the way. I don't know if you noticed that, Andy, for the.
Oh, okay,
minute.
thank you.
5-minute break, I forget how to mute. Here we go. In the operations fund, we calculate we need 60 days of cash on hand. That would ordinarily be for regular spending, not emergency spending. That would be regular spending. And it would seem to me that if something hit like COVID, we would do as we did with COVID. We would cut expenses, operating expenses drastically for the situation. So is that $8 million really a reasonable figure? Maybe what we need to say is, okay, if we went down to a skeleton crew, we cut to the bone, we'd only need $4 million to get through those 60 days. Is that a reasonable assumption? That's my first question. My second question is, where does this money sit? Now, I know it sits in the budget. It's money that we're not going to have to borrow, but there's $12 million. At some point down the road, we got over $12 million. That's on paper. If we need that $12 million because of a crisis, you can't say, well, we just won't borrow it because probably nobody will want to lend this money then anyway. So is that money real money? If a meteor hit and we needed to do $12 million worth of repairs, would we have $12 million, or would we have some figure in our, on paper that says we do, but we don't?
So, so on your first question, this is the 60 days. That's 2 months. So it's not even 20% of the cash expenses, and it's based on FY22 dollars, which are not pre-COVID dollars. They're not the barest minimum, but they're not pre-COVID. But the 60 days is pretty low by other benchmarks. The other ones that I saw had 120 starting, and I knew that was not tolerable. So, and this is not to be used. This would be used for operations that would be the bare minimum. Like last spring, if we did, and you're absolutely right, Dick, and that's why in the policy we recommend that we would do other things first. We would mitigate these. These are for unforeseen, otherwise unsurmountable. We would, of course, cut expenses right away, just like we did. We demonstrated that we would do that. And so it would not be for just a budget gap. It would be for a real crisis.
Okay.
And it's not very much, and it's a lot. It's a lot of money for CA because we haven't carried these before. But you could start if you wanted to. We're only recommending up $5 million. We're not saying that it needs that you would set aside 12 at this point by any means. If this is the target, though, if you agree that these are the risks, then this is the target. So,
well, I'm looking long term. I'm looking at the $12 million in 2025, and I'm just what I'm asking you. Will there be $12 million readily accessible, or will this just be funny money that we don't have to borrow from somebody who's not going to lend us money anyway? So I want to know that there's something tangible, that we can feel, real dollars that would be available for a crisis.
The intention is for those dollars to be in the bank. We would not record them if they weren't. So
okay, this is on our bank account.
This would be dollars in investments in the bank, right?
Okay, thank you. That solves my problem.
Okay.
Okay, Shari, Janet, and Nancy. Shari?
Yeah, so Susan, when I'm thinking about reserves, I'm thinking that this would in effect go into an untouchable fund for a particular fiscal year. I think one of the things that would make it easier to see is if this was thought of as a separate line item.
Right.
So that it is sort of sealed off in its own line. And then that line just continues to be seen as something that's not touched over the 4 quarters. The question that I had was, when you're looking at the operating expenses, are those based on where CA is now with a much reduced employees, much reduced expenses as far as salaries are concerned, just as one example? Or are we looking back to 2018, 2019?
So 2 things. One, this would not be just for a particular fiscal year. This would be a separate line on the balance sheet on the statement of financial position. It would show as board designated cash reserves, and it would be an ongoing thing. It's not specific to a fiscal year. The potential increases would be, or the potential funding of it, but not the reserve balance. And secondly, the memo says that the cash on hand of 60 days is based on the FY22 budget.
All right, so it's 22, so that's the smaller organization.
Well, it's not as small as 21, but it doesn't go back to pre-COVID levels, correct?
Okay, so we're speculating on where CA might be, not necessarily where CA was. Correct. And I think that's another important thing for us to keep in mind as we're kind of reorienting ourselves. Could this money be used for something like salaries?
It could be used for whatever category or line item of expense it would be needed for. The point is not the type of expense. The point is the type of the incident that creates the need. So if there were, if there was a second shutdown we reduce expenses like we did last time, and we furlough team members who aren't working, et cetera, then if there was still a remaining need for team members who were working, perhaps in open space or elsewhere where they had to work, then yes, it could be used for that purpose if the organization agreed.
Okay, all right, so theoretically, we could create a list of emergency uses that, and I know other organizations have, where they would say, in effect, under these circumstances, like A or B or C or D, leaving open the possibility for something that hasn't been thought of. But that would help to put parameters and help to put, this sense of what is this going to be used for, rather than it's just sitting there. So that's what I'm thinking about as we're discussing this. Thank you.
Janet, followed by Nancy and Alan.
Susan, I was curious if you had thoughts as to how this would be invested and whether or not that investment income comes in as income in the year.
Okay, so CA has a board-approved investment policy already that drives what we do with excess cash as we have it. So it would be invested along in accordance with that policy. So it's government, it's usually treasuries and government paper for the most part. It's very secure. Now, we should take a look at that and because it might be too conservative, but
Well, that was what I was going to ask.
Yeah.
If we wouldn't want, with that kind of cash, we wouldn't want to diversify a little bit to
Yep.
have.
Yeah, I think so. But right now, and that would be the next step, would be to look at that and, bring that to the board with some recommendations. But there is there is an approved investment policy, and the income would be investment income would be recorded as income in the current year, and that could be used to increase the balance as well towards the target.
Thank you.
Nancy, followed by Alan.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions. Janet just asked one of them. You're talking about 5 million this coming fiscal year. I thought we had been talking about 2 million, or am I getting this wrong?
I'm sorry. So the original the parameter was 2 million. That 2 million, you could stick with that. I'm just showing you what the risks are to the organization. So if you think that we only need 10 days worth of operating expenses on hand, then 2 million is adequate, and that would be fine.
But this is our first year of starting this reserve fund.
Right.
And we are still trying to come out of the pandemic. So we've done a couple of drastic things this year because we had to cut expenses. And for us to turn around from 2 in the middle of we're still recovering to 5 million, what else is going to get cut? I'm personally, I'm really uncomfortable with this.
Yeah.
Who decides whether it's a critical enough reason to use the money? And how does the board get informed?
This is, again, it's a draft, and it's like you said, it's your first discussion. And this is based on research that we would say that the president CEO has authority to use it as long as it's replenished within the year. Any drawdown that cannot be replaced within the year would be approved by a 2/3 majority of the board. Any use of the fund would be approved by a 2/3 majority of the board. So that's in the policy here, and it would be reported to the board with the fiscal year end reporting and the quarterly reporting. So you'd see it on the financial statements every quarter. There would be a report of, well, you would know the use because you'd have to approve it. And then our thought was that the audit committee would also be reported. It would be reported to them as well.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Alan?
Yeah, let me follow up on that one. If maybe I missed something in reading that section, but it said that the president CEO can go ahead and use the fund as long as they can get the money replaced.
Mm-hmm.
But if it can't be replaced, then it requires 2/3 vote. But we might not know that it couldn't be replaced until after the money had already been withdrawn.
Right.
So that feels a little backwards. Or am I missing something? Susan, just put yourself on mute.
Yeah, I did. No, so you can change that. This is based on what the board would be notified. And again, this is a draft. So if you would like that tighter, then it could be certainly made more constrained.
Okay. Well, I'm also open to hearing why that's how, as it's written, is a good idea. Right now, it feels like a disaster waiting to happen. I'm not implicating any individual, but it just feels like a problem. I didn't catch if you made it your answer to the question of whatever interest money we get on this reserve cash, is it usable? And if so, how, or does it have to sit there because it's cash and we can't use cash because we didn't budget for it? I'm confused.
So generally speaking, just like with the self-insurance trust and the workers' comp trust, the interest and investment earnings go right back and add to the balance of those funds. So that's the intention of this. If you would rather spend the interest earnings, you could, but it would be harder to grow the balance. So
Okay.
that's your decision.
Thank you. Where does the money, this 4 million a year, where is this money coming from?
It's
You
5
put yourself
million.
back on mute, Susan.
Sorry about that. So the initial amounts would be reserved from the financing proceeds that we already issued. So we just would keep the expense controls in place, keep the capital spending low, and just preserve that financing proceeds. So that's
So
where.
we'd be borrowing money to go into this reserve?
No, we already have. That's the June term financing.
And what did we originally borrow the money for?
To pay off the line of credit and to use for the cash needs as were needed for the pandemic.
And if we weren't thinking about doing this, what would we do with the money?
We would, it would just be used to not borrow going forward, or well, really, basically right now, just to not borrow going forward.
So we can not use money to not borrow going forward, but we can't use money to pay expenses going forward. Am I hearing that correctly?
That's correct.
Okay. I don't know why, but that's the next question. Not the next question now, but that'll be the question for a little training session. Help me understand, given the horrors that we've gone through as a society and as an organization this past year, what would have been different if we'd had this fund fully in place in March of last year?
Well, we wouldn't have had to take funds out of the self-insurance trust, and we would perhaps have been able to pay team members a little longer, or we certainly would not have had to have people working full-time at less pay than they earned. And I'm not speaking of the senior team, but there are many team members who are working full-time, making 75% of their pay. It may have been possible to keep open the childcare options earlier, or provide additional services that the community really needed along those lines. There wasn't a lot that you could do at the beginning, especially with the capacity restrictions, but there were those kinds of things could have happened.
And where would we have gotten the money to repay it if we would have had to repay it in the same fiscal year?
Well, you wouldn't have. That would be the drawdown that you would use.
But that's in the policy. It's got to be repaid in the same fiscal year.
No. Only if the president uses it. Not if the board does. A drawdown that cannot. Here, it's right here. Drawdown from the fund.
I see. Those are separate. I see. Okay, I was misunderstanding. Got it. Okay, I thought that paragraph 2 was sort of a consequence of paragraph 1.
No.
That's how I was reading. Why I asked my previous question. Okay. Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, yeah, I just want to say it's been an interesting discussion, but the areas that I think of when I think about this rainy day fund is, as Susan kind of indicated, when we were in a cash crunch back at the very beginning of the pandemic, back in March and April, you know, we could have used these funds instead of trying to go to one of the other self-insurance funds we have to kind of cover the costs. And then the other thing is, if you think, I'll say, you know, climate change type activities, if another tornado comes through and suddenly we need $1 million to clean up trees or something like that, and you say, there's no way we can do it, you know, we just can't cut that much out of the operating budget. You could use like the rainy day fund. This reserve fund. And so those are the types of things, you know, that the emergency, the unforeseen things. But I think, you know, it's just the pandemic showed us we have got to have some cash in reserve for unexpected stuff. But that's my thought. Milton, you're next.
Yes, and I just want to make a quick point because there's a couple of things. the example that I like to share with you, say for FY22, the approved budget had $55 million in there in projected income, $55 million there in projected expenses. And we're moving through the fiscal year, and we get to 6 months in, and the numbers for the projected income is now down to, say, 35 million. And everyone say, but we have to keep doing spending for those things that we wanted to do. We could not tap this reserve, this cash reserve, to supplement that, what we are now projecting as lost income.
Okay, thanks, Milton. Nancy?
Sorry. Never mind. I think we talked about what I wanted already. Thanks.
All right. I think we ran over time.
Could I just make one more point and see if there's been
Yes,
two
Alan.
mentions of the self-insurance fund. And I guess one way to look at it is the way it was presented. The other way to look at it is, in a sense, we've already got a reserve. We've got this other fund. Why do we need another fund? So I'd like to hear some response to that.
I would be happy to explain that. So and we did have that excess cash we were able to use 3 million from the fund because there was excess cash in there. But there's an actuarial study done every year that tells us how much cash has to be on reserve in those funds, both of them on the general liability, that in case of the potential claims coming. So I don't know if you're familiar with that. So the actuaries look at what our incidents are, the claims to date, and then have all these formulas that project out what the likelihood and the magnitude of those will be, and then tell us how much we have to have in reserve. And that has to be done as part of the annual outside audit. So those reserves have to be adequate according to the actuarial study. So all of those dollars are not available for use, or we would not get a clean opinion on our audit.
Well, Susan, we should add also that we basically had to get permission from our actuaries to use those dollars.
Well, I had to make sure that it wouldn't impair the
Right.
actuary report, but right. Mhm.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for the discussion. As I said, you're going to see this topic again come the April work session. So I encourage you to, continue to think about it. We're going to move on.
Excuse me, Andy, I'm sorry. Could I ask if board members have other questions or possible edits or changes that they would send them to me so we could start to, get the information together in advance?
Yeah, good idea, Susan. Thanks.
Well, I'm going to say that I'm still struggling to understand it, so I'm not sure I'm going to have much language until I fully understand it. Thanks.
Okay, next item, applicable state legislation. There was a memo sent out. Any questions? Nope, I don't see any. Okay.
Help me understand why this is a questions only, not a I'm not clear on the distinction between questions only and discussion.
Well, I think, originally there were, when we talked about it at the BOC, because of time constraints, we had said, okay, let's just make this questions only. It wasn't a general discussion of bills. I think that's about the best I can say.
Okay, thanks, Andy.
Sure. Okay, chairman's remarks, that's written. Any questions? Nope, good. Move on to reports and presentations. President's report, that was also submitted in writing. Any question? All right, Ginny.
Yeah, thanks, Andy. Page 7, Milton. under opportunities, capital, wait, yeah. I'm just wondering, do we get any information as to whether we're going to get additional funding through the Maryland State Department of Education for our child care programs?
We've applied for another grant.
Yeah, I know, but I mean, we just applied, so we don't have any answer yet. I want to
No.
congratulate you then on being very resourceful and, in applying for a lot of these and getting finally the county grant to the 40, I think it was 41,000 or something.
Well, also, we have been working, and we have also reached back out, as stated in the memo or the email that you shared with the rest of the board. Howard County government has received a little over $63 million in additional, the state share of the $1.9 trillion stimulus package. And we have reached out to Howard County, ongoing conversation, sharing them with some projects that we would like for consideration. And they've been very receptive to it, making no commitments, because I know there's others lining up for the dollars also.
Mm-hmm.
Shari?
Thank you.
Yeah, on page 2, there's information about purchasing, about the updating of contracts. And I just had a question. The CA board years ago passed a policy about purchasing from women and minority-owned businesses. And we had established some goals, but we never really revisited this. I think I've asked about this before. So did we have any established goals for FY21? That's my first question.
I would have to go back and find out, but yes, we set goals every year. We set goals to pursue to try to have with our contracts for minority women and veteran-owned businesses.
Okay, and is CA tracking this policy in terms of the percentage of contracts that are going that way? If so, can we get that information? I'd like to ask that this be put on the tracking form. If we could just see a chart of some kind, because this is one of the things that tends to fall through the cracks because we forget to ask for it.
Yes,
so I'd appreciate that.
We track it annually, and yes, we can provide that information.
Thank you.
Okay, any other questions on the president's report? Nope. Okay, we'll move on. The next item is the report from our reps on the Inner Arbor Trust Board. They submitted in writing. Any questions? Dick?
Yes, I just had one quick question. Milton, are you still on the board of the Downtown Partnership?
Yes.
Okay. Good. I'm going to have some questions about that soon, but not tonight.
Okay.
Okay, any questions on the report for Inner Arbor Trust? No? All right. Move on to the financial reports and updates. Susan, Milton, anything you want to say first?
No, Susan, just the update on the third quarter.
So this was reviewed and discussed by the audit committee on Tuesday night, and I know that some people were in attendance. So the financial report was posted on the web. And I guess really I would just take some questions. Does anyone have any questions about it? Oh, one thing I did want to note that would be of interest to you is that we did go ahead and based on the board feedback from previous meetings to adjust the estimate for the annual charge share to the villages upward based on the increase in annual charge revenue. So we just did an estimate of that, and we'll refine those numbers, but we understand that that's what, that is the desire of the board, so we may just reflected that in the estimate. Yes, Renee?
So I saw your estimate, and I'm not sure is your estimate based on the lower percentage, but the higher assessment number, or is it based on the prior percentage and the higher assessment number, or some combination?
I didn't understand that. Can you
Well, in other words, the assessment, we brought in more assessment money than we thought. So my question is, you came up with a formula that was different for this year than it was for the prior year.
So, the adjustment that it's not an adjustment, the estimate that we put in, because it hasn't occurred yet, is based on the difference between what was budgeted for the annual charge and what was received. And that budget, we expected it to be 8 point something and change percent lower than the previous year. And that was the amount that that portion of the annual charge share was reduced for the villages. We're making that up. Does that make sense?
Yes, that answered that question. So I have a follow-up to that. So I understand, that there's also a third of a contingency fund payment that's due. Is that where is the payment going forward to the villages for that?
That's going to be in April.
So you're going to pay the final third out.
Correct.
And so is that a payable right now that you're going to pay? Okay, so it's listed as an accounts payable.
Correct.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, Dick, Janet, Renee, you were on the audit committee. Anything you want to say about the third quarter report?
No, we agreed to send it on to the board, and it got sent on to the board, and there was no real, there were no big problems.
No. I mean, so the one thing that Dan Burns was very kind in sending me a memo today that I think he copied the other board members on, showing the cost of acquiring a new membership. And I think that's something that the board should look at on some periodic basis. It's basically, it looks like a combination of, if they give them a free month at the gym, what it costs if we pay a commission or whatever to acquire a new member. And that tells us a little bit about that's something we need to keep in mind, because that tells us if the member's not there for probably about 3 months, that we're going to, that's the break-even point for that member. And that's an important thing for everybody to understand, is what the break-even point is for a new member. The other thing that I'm looking at and watching is what's going to happen with golf memberships. Because golf memberships tend to go in 12-month cycles. We had a large influx of memberships at the beginning of the summer last year, and those memberships could either roll off or they could stay. So we need to watch what happens with the golf memberships during the summertime to see if people actually roll off or they really enjoy it and they stay playing golf. So that's something else that I'm personally keeping an eye on. The other question I have is, I noticed that the number of members in the sports and fitness dropped by about 1,500. They had a drop off, probably due to the pandemic. But I think that we need to go back. Didn't we used to get a dashboard or something where we saw membership numbers on a more regular basis?
Dashboard is the next topic.
Okay, we're all in. I'm all in. So,
And we were told that things seem to be improving in the sports and fitness thing.
Right.
It's slow, but sure, we're crawling back. So that was mentioned.
Exactly.
And,
All right.
and the dashboard's a quarterly report to the board.
Right.
Yeah.
All right. Any other questions? All right. We'll move on now to the dashboard. Milton, anything you want to start with?
Let's keep rolling. So Susan and Dan.
So the financial metrics are the same. The metrics from 1 through 9 are what had been reported previously. And they just were not, I think the last time we did it was Q3 of, well, yeah. And, but anyway, here's the metrics, the things that stand out. Obviously, it's metric 4, the free cash flow. You can see that we did not have the, we had cash shortage in 2020, but we did meet all of our covenants. So, really, that's pretty self-explanatory. I don't think there's anything to add to that. The membership, advertising effectiveness shows membership cost of acquisition, and I know that there's been the turnover in communications and marketing leadership, and those numbers are you see Tim's goal of the marketing cost per member. And
could we pause a member with no intent to insult anyone? When Susan talks about we met all our covenants, we're not talking about our typical covenants we use every day. This is a different type of covenant. So everyone understands that, right?
Right. They're not architectural covenants, they're debt covenants. Right. Sorry about that. And then the most, the thing that did change was that the Clara Bridge survey. So Dan's on, and I think he would like to go through that and give you an update and orientation to that.
So any questions for Susan before we bring Dan on? No? Okay, Dan?
Okay, I forgot to plug my camera in. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. I just looked up, I went to turn it off mute, and all of a sudden it's like, you're not there. I was like, oh, sorry. So I just want to comment on Renee's comment about golf. We typically have about 300 memberships in golf, a little right around there, maybe a little more. And we've sold 34 golf memberships in the last 3 months. Golf is showing no signs of slowing down anytime soon. Every moment there's a bright sky and no rain, the tee sheet is full. They are having a very good time. But going on to the survey, we did a completely different survey this time. And this was more of a temperature check of our community. Reaching out to them and seeing how they were doing, seeing what we could do going forward, and welcoming them back and helping them. I shared it in the on the dashboard. Let me share it on my screen and walk through real quick. Personally, I think the best upgrade to the survey was putting my lovely mug on the survey. It drove up the response rate, so it must have worked. But I'll tell you, when I sent them the picture that I have on the website, they're like, no, can you send us one of you smiling? I don't have one. So Carol, my admin, had to take pictures of me. We sent them a bunch of pictures so they could make that. But the previous survey was really simple. It asked 5 straightforward satisfaction questions. How satisfied are you with staff, with facilities, with programming? And it was a 1 to 5 rating. Then what can we do to make your experience better? And then the net promoter score on a scale of 0 to 10, how would you rate us and why? That was it. And we're gonna, that gives us a lot of operational information. And next survey, we're going back to that. But this one, we wanted to change it up and really try to communicate and see how people were doing. And hence the pictures to make it more personal. And we're going to continue with this format because we got a really good response. And again, I think it's because of my picture, of course. The first thing, we look at things like your stress level, how everybody's doing. Oh, the other thing that was different about this survey, normally the surveys are triggered by visits. So individual members would receive surveys if they visited one of the facilities. This we send to all active members, frozen members, and canceled members for the past year. So in order to do that, we could only send it to the head of household. It did create some interesting responses. And it makes comparisons a little bit hard from quarter to quarter, so some of the comparisons won't quite line up. We asked about stress levels, what they've been doing over the last year. And if you know anything about me, I'm always on a bike, so that, of course, the bike had to be in there. Then we looked at, how big of a part of your social life is Columbia Association? How do we fit into that? And then, what was it like before the pandemic? So how has it changed? How have we moved in or out of your life because of the pandemic? And then what are you gonna miss out? What did you miss out on? What can we do to make your life easier coming back? Some of the things they've been looking forward to doing. Very interesting responses there. The Net Promoter Score question, asking about staff. So very straightforward, very emotional. I'll tell you, the thing about this, when we send the other ones out, sometimes people will reply directly back to the survey instead of taking the survey. And Alan did that actually. They'll ask questions, why did I get this? Or I didn't go to that facility or something. This time we actually got people responding back, writing paragraphs about how stressful their home life was and how they missed going out, and people thinking they were responding directly to me. It was really kind of the emotional responses was really pretty surprising. And it was really, really heartfelt. This was the email that went out with the introduction to the survey. Now for the actual survey. We had a little over 1,000 responses. That was up from the 900 we had from the quarter before. Interestingly, the Net Promoter Score dropped dramatically. But again, it only went to head of households. These weren't really necessarily users. But over here, you can see the breakdown. Normally, this green box makes up 50 to 60% of the respondents. Those are the promoters. And then the detractors are usually under 20%, and the promoter or the neutrals, the grays, fill in the middle. So we had a pretty even pie here, which is really kind of interesting with it. So both the detractors and the neutrals grew a little bit. Some of it had to do with the canceled members, I think. Pools were talked about a lot, so I'm sure that drove some of it. Sentiment is whether people's comments were positive and negative, and the scale is -5 to 5. So it hovered right around neutral. The previous survey was a little bit higher, a little bit above. This one's just essentially 0. So the comments were when they balanced out, were pretty straight across the board. A new metric was emotional intensity. Emotional intensity, where sentiment is positive or negative, emotional intensity denotes feelings. Whether they were happy about it, sad about it, angry about it. And the survey before, now again, you have to remember, those were just strictly users. This scale is 1 to 5. Was 2.76. So it dropped a little bit, but considering the drop in Net Promoter Score, and again, these things aren't always correlated. The emotional intensity was pretty neutral. There really wasn't tremendously strong feelings across the board one way or the other. The gender split was more female than male. Age group, the 65 plus and the 0 to 24, so the 18 to 24 were the dominant age groups, with the 25 to 44s bringing up the bottom. One of the interesting things, how big of a part, I can't talk tonight, how big of a part of your life, social life, is Columbia Association? On a scale of 1 to 5, currently it's 2.7. that dropped from a ranking of 3.1 from before the survey. So, we were a big part of their life, and we're still at 2.7. That's out of 5. That's still more than half. But there's opportunity for regrowth there and getting people re-involved. And even overall, we'll probably drop this survey maybe once a year or some kind of period and tweak it up a little bit. But track that. That'll be a new thing that we'll look at. Stress levels, 3.4. Everybody's stressed. So as much as we can do to take care of that. What people are looking forward to most, everybody across all demographics wants to go out to eat. Everybody wants to go out to eat. And concerts and shows, those were the big things, playing sports, those and something else, just those brought up the rest. But, so what that means is, when we get back to it, the programming we did on the lakefront is going to be welcome. People want to get back to that. We have tremendous opportunity with that. With the going out to eat, that's a tremendous opportunity for us to reward our members and work with our members by partnering with the Turnhouse and other restaurants in town to provide opportunities. So there's ways we can work with our members to make that happen. And the playing sports, we're seeing that with the golf and the tennis and the Clippers. We're seeing that people really, really want to do that. Mostly residents responded, resident versus non-resident, and usually that's the way it is. The net promoter score for those groups was essentially the same. Then we look at what people talk about. Residents really wanted the pools open. That was their number one topic of conversation. About 333 people mentioned the pools, but it was 280 some mentioned wanting to work out. So, those are the top two things. And here you see the gym workout. Hours of operation, opening the pools, that kind of fell into the hours of operation a little bit, but also some of the programming and classes, remember this was done in January. We were still under some other restrictions and opening things up. The non-residents, the pools dropped a little bit on the non-resident compared to the residents, but the hours of operation and the workouts were there. And not assigned were guests, and that volume is really low. They were just guests in the system.
Dan, before you move off of that, what's the significance on that or other charts of that gray circle being inside or outside of the line?
That gray circle is you're talking the one here that I'm hovering over?
I can't see your...
Yeah, okay. It goes away from a cursor. That's the net promoter score for the people who talked about those things.
Okay, thank you.
And that scale is up here. So in this case, it's a -2. In this case, it's an 18.
Thank you.
And then looking at the volume by unit, that's the facilities. Supreme is our busiest facility, so it always gets the most responses. Across the board down to the sports park, which was closed, and the ice rink was a lot of rentals. So there wasn't a lot of usage there. And again, when we start looking at what people were talking about at the different facilities, gym workout, pool, lessons, classes, people really miss their classes, workout, athletic club. It's really, if you look down here, it's interesting, in the middle of COVID, facility safety rules was really only a big topic of conversation at the athletic club. Social events, that doesn't surprise for the athletic club. Was somebody asking a question? I heard. Columbia Swim Center, obviously the pool, Hobbits Glen. Surprisingly, they were talking about working out, but social events there. And social events and family, that's one thing that people really missed. So the team is working on how we can create more physically distant social activity. that with the return of um, the roller skating at Supreme with we have the capacity up to 40, and families are using it as play dates, having the opportunity to socialize and get together. So we're starting to see that. And down here is where you can see all these big blue bars are going out to eat across the different types of memberships, across the demographics, male, female, across all the age groups. Everybody just wants to go out to a restaurant. So if restaurants can hold on, they're going to go gangbusters. I'm on the county tourism board, and we met the other day, and like we're struggling with lifeguards. They were talking, some of the restaurant owners were talking about how they're struggling to find staff right now. And the last piece of this was just interesting. It was a forced rank on what you were, what activities were most important to you. And these dark bars, these dark maroon bars, are workout. Workout, exercise. So position 1, 2, and 3 for freeze, 1, 2, and 3 for canceled, 1, 2, and 4. Working out was the most important activities for them. So lots of good information there. Lots of insight to use for the staff for programming. For Tim and Danik as we message everyone. But in general, like I said, some of the things people wrote were really, in a few cases, heartbreaking, but really inspiring, at the impact you have in people's lives. And, we normally don't get that in the other survey we do because it's more about the visit rather than the relationship. So any questions?
Okay, we have some, Dan. Alan, Jess, and Dick.
Yeah.
Alan is first.
First of all, Dan, thank you for doing this different survey. It's considered these days a really best practice for organizations to really pay attention during COVID to their staff and customers in this way, and it's made a lot of sense to me. Second is, if I was a different person than I was, I might be upset about the survey not being anonymous, but but I'm okay that you outed me. My only real question goes back to before you talked about the dashboard at all is, and I know we've talked about this before, but I hear different things. Do we make money on our golf courses, or does annual, I'm talking normal years, or does our assessment dollars somewhat cover our golf courses?
The assessment dollars cover the golf courses. If you remember back to one of the charts we did early on, from a cash flow perspective, Hobbit's Glen generates a positive cash flow. The depreciation on the clubhouse is what brings it underwater. But Fairway Hills is one of the few facilities that does not have a positive cash flow.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, Jess and then Dick.
I'm sorry, I didn't out you on the survey just because you emailed me a question about it.
Got it, thank you.
I really didn't have a question. I really just wanted to compliment you guys on this survey. I got it, and that's how I discovered it. So, and I took the survey, and I just thought it had a really nice feeling to it. There was a very caring vibe, as caring as a survey can be. And so I just thought it was a really thoughtful way to present the survey. That's all.
Thank you. The Clarabridge partnered with a new survey company, and because they were doing them in-house. And the first couple of times we went through the survey, the new company made some mistakes, and I was not happy. And the CEO actually called me and set up a call, CEO of the survey company, and he actually built this survey on his dime for us, and did all the work, much to his staff chagrin. But he lives in Spain, but we had many calls doing it. So yes, they did a great job on it. Thank you.
Dick?
Well, I just wanted to echo what Alan and Jess said. This was an incredible survey, and it's a terrific tool, not just for sports and fitness, but for the entire organization. I liked having that photo in there because that really humanizes it. It says we're not just some big monolith. We got real people, and I hope that you continue to do that with some of your other people, and we need to do that across the board. One just tiny nit is it did have your name there, but it might be nice if you had your title in there so people know why you're grinning at them, and to show that there are real people running this show. So anyway, thank you very much. This was a terrific thing to see.
Thank you.
All right, any other questions? No? All right, thank you, Dan. Thanks,
Thank
Susan.
you.
Next item, tracking forms. We all came a hard copy. Any question? No? Okay, we're on to proposed new topics. Any discussion? Any? All right, talking points. Bonnie, are you ready for talking points? I'll tell you what, we'll send the talking points out.
Yes.
Right, Milton?
Yes, I'll get with Janet and Bonnie, and we'll compile the talking points.
All right. Wow, it's 9:03 and we are done. It's actually nice for this whole week to finally get a meeting that's shorter than what was scheduled. But thank you very much. You know, we're done with the agenda, so have a great weekend. I'll adjourn the meeting. Good night, everyone.